The gavel comes down like a gunshot, and Andy Dufresne doesn't flinch. He just stands there in his neat suit, hands folded, eyes fixed on a point somewhere past the judge, like he's watching a different man get sentenced to die inside a prison made of stone. Outside the courthouse, the sky is bright. Inside, everything feels damp anyway. 2 weeks earlier, he'd been parked on a hill with a bottle of bourbon and a pistol heavy in his palm. Below him, his wife's house, lights on, laughter leaking through windows he couldn't hear. The kind of laughing that doesn't include you. Andy sat in the dark, jaw locked, knuckles white, telling himself he was only there to scare the lover, to make the world stop spinning for 1 second so he could breathe. Then he'd driven away. That part is true. But truth doesn't matter much once people decide what you are. By the time the prosecutor is finished, Andy has become a simple story. Jealous husband, rich banker, rage, bullets. They talk about his calm like it's proof. Like only a monster could sit so still while his life collapses. Andy tries to speak, voice even, words careful. He says he didn't do it. He says he loved her. He says he was drunk and angry, but not a murderer. And the room listens the way people listen to rain tapping a window present, but already convinced it won't change anything. So the bus ride begins. Chains clink with every bump, a cruel little rhythm that turns men into livestock. Night swallows the road as Shawshank State Penitentiary rises ahead, all brick and bars, a fortress built to make hope feel childish. The new inmates go quiet, not because they found peace, but because their throats have forgotten how to swallow. Andy's face stays unreadable. Not brave, not tough. Just controlled. And that control makes the other men hate him a little, the way you hate someone who doesn't bleed when you do. Inside the intake room, the air smells like bleach and old sweat. A guard barks orders like he's feeding dogs. Heads are shaved, names are replaced with numbers. Clothes are stripped away and replaced with rough prison denim that scratches at the skin like it's trying to remind you don't belong to yourself anymore. Andy's wedding ring is pulled off without ceremony. For the first time, something flickers across his face. Not grief, not anger, a hollow surprise, as if he didn't realize they'd take the last small piece that proved he once had a life. Then comes the gauntlet, a line of inmates on either side, yelling, laughing, spitting words like stones. Captain Hadley, thick neck, mean hands, walks the row like a man who enjoys the sound of fear. The new fish shuffle forward, eyes down. One young guy trembles so hard his teeth click. Somebody cries out. Somebody tries to crack a joke. The joke dies in the air. Andy steps into the yard and looks up at the walls. They're high enough to block the sky. He's thinking something he won't say out loud. This can't be real. But it is. And it's permanent in the way mountains are permanent. That night, the first night, the prison tests everyone. The lights go out and the dark fills with whispers, curses, and the kind of crying that makes you want to disappear. Men shout at the new guys to shut up. Guards laugh from behind locked doors. A bet starts floating through the blocks, passed like contraband, who will break first, who will sob loud enough to get noticed. Red watches from his bunk with the easy stillness of someone who has survived too many nights to pretend he's shocked. He's the man who can get things. Cigarettes, a deck of cards, a poster with a smile too bright for this place. His eyes track the new inmates like he's reading weather. He picks the trembling kid. Most do. It's always the trembling ones. The crying starts, thin at first, then cracking, then full-bodied desperation. Hadley storms in. A thud. A sickening sound of flesh meeting something harder. The crying turns into a wet gasp and then silence. Not peaceful silence. The kind that sits on your chest. In the morning, they whisper, "The kid didn't make it." Just like that, Shawshank introduces itself, not with rules, but with consequences. Andy doesn't cry. He lies on his bunk, staring at the ceiling, listening. Every shout, every laugh, every distant rattle of keys lands in his mind like a nail. When the lights snap on, his face is pale but composed. Some men call that strength. Red calls it something else. A man who holds himself that tightly is either already broken or hiding a plan so deep he can't afford to let it show. Days settle into a routine that isn't really a routine. It's a slow grind designed to sand down edges until everyone looks the same. In the yard, wolves circle. The sisters notice Andy fast, the quiet one, the educated one, the one who doesn't understand how predators smell. Fear even when you don't show it. A hand brushes his shoulder too long. A voice whispers too close. Andy keeps walking, but his spine stiffens. Don't react, his body says. Don't give them the satisfaction. Then the warden arrives in the way powerful men always arrive. Clean, certain, Bible in hand, smile like a lock clicking shut. Samuel Norton speaks of discipline and salvation, but his eyes measure men the way bankers measure risk. Andy watches him, and for the first time since the courthouse, Andy's calm feels less like numbness and more like calculation. He's learning what kind of cage this is, and what kind of man runs it. One afternoon in the yard, Red sits beside Andy on the bench like it's nothing. Like men choose their company here instead of being forced into it. Red tosses out a casual line, testing the water. Andy answers politely. Too politely. Like he's still at a cocktail party he doesn't belong at. Red almost laughs. Then Andy says it. Quiet. Almost careless. I hear you're the man who can get things. Red's eyebrows lift just a fraction. Depends on what you're buying. Andy looks down at his hands. Those neat banker hands that don't belong in a place where fists talk louder than words. A rock hammer, he says. Small one. A tool for carving stone. In a prison made of stone. Red studies him, and a chill creeps under his shirt that has nothing to do with weather. Because there are only a few reasons a man would want something like that in Shawshank, and none of them are safe. Red doesn't laugh. He just watches Andy's face, waiting for the punchline. There isn't one. In Shawshank, wanting something small usually means dreaming something big. A rock hammer, Red mutters. For what, bankman? Andy's eyes stay on the yard dirt. For rocks. Then, softer, I like to carve. He says it like it's harmless, like predators won't hear hobby and smell escape. A week later, the hammer arrives in a prison-issue shoebox, palm-sized, innocent-looking. Red slips it to him like a sacred thing. Andy's fingers close around the handle and, for the first time, his control cracks. Just a tremor of relief. That same night, the sisters drift closer in the corridor, smiling without warmth. Andy tucks the hammer away. Tomorrow, they'll want payment. The payment comes in a hallway that smells like damp laundry and old rage. Andy feels them before he sees them. Soft footsteps. A laugh that isn't happy. Boggs Diamond slides in front of him, blocking the light like a door shutting. New fish, he whispers, almost gentle. You're gonna learn to belong. Andy tries words first. Calm words. Banker words. They bounce off prison hunger. Hands grab. Andy fights, but it's messy and useless, like punching smoke. A guard's whistle finally cuts the air, and the sisters scatter, smiling like they'll be back for dessert. In the infirmary, Andy stares at the ceiling again, but this time, he's not just listening. He's studying. Shawshank isn't about strength. It's about leverage. Who can hurt you, who can protect you, and what you can offer that makes you worth more alive than broken. When he limps into the yard, Red is waiting on the bench like he knew. You okay? Red asks, but his eyes say, welcome to the real sentence. Andy swallows hard. I'll manage. Red snorts. Yeah. That's what we all said, before Shawshank taught us different. Andy's fingers brush the hidden rock hammer in his pocket, and a thought sharpens behind his calm. If he can't stop the cage, he'll have to outthink it. Andy learns Shawshank's language fast. Keep your head low, keep your eyes open. In the laundry, steam fogs the air like a constant sigh. Men talk in half sentences, always watching who's listening. Then one day in the yard, Andy hears Captain Hadley bragging, loud proud about a fat inheritance and the government stealing it with taxes. The other inmates go silent. You don't interrupt a man like Hadley. Andy does anyway. Not bold, not loud, just precise. He steps closer and says, if you want to keep your money, there's a legal way. Hadley turns, face twisting. For one terrifying second, Andy's mouth has written a check his body can't cash. Hadley grabs him by the collar and drags him toward the edge of the roof they're tarring, the drop yawning below. Andy doesn't beg. He talks numbers, paperwork, loopholes. The kind of calm that sounds like confidence. Hadley's grip loosens. By sunset, the crew is sitting on that same roof, passing cold beers like contraband sunshine. Andy doesn't drink. He just watches the men's faces soften for the first time in years. And Red realizes something. Andy didn't buy beer. He bought protection. The next morning, Shawshank feels different. Not kinder, just negotiated. The guards stop looking at Andy like a joke, and the sisters start circling from farther away, like wolves who've noticed a rifle on the porch. Then a message comes. Warden Norton wants to see you. Andy walks into that office and the air changes. Polished wood, clean paper, the Bible sitting open like a warning label. Norton smiles the way a man smiles when he's found a use for you. Captain Hadley tells me you're good with finances. Andy keeps his voice steady. I know the law, sir. Norton leans back, measuring him. You'll help my men. You'll keep things tidy. And just like that, Andy isn't only an inmate anymore. He's a tool, a rare one, the kind that doesn't get thrown away unless it stops working. Andy's world shrinks and somehow gets sharper. They move him off the line and into a little office that smells like ink and power. He files taxes for guards who used to spit past his shoes. He writes letters that make their wives smile. And every time he solves a problem, you can almost hear another brick slide into place between him and the rest of the prison. Not a wall to trap him, but a wall to shield him. Then Andy starts writing other letters, one a week. Same address, same request, books, funds, anything for a real prison library. The state ignores him, so he writes again and again. Patient like a dripping faucet that doesn't care how long it takes to crack stone, Warden Norton notices. One evening, Norton closes the office door, lowers his voice, and slides a folder across the desk. Inside are numbers that don't belong to any honest budget. You're smart, Dufresne, the warden says, smiling like a lock. I need a man who can make dirty money look born clean. Norton taps the Bible with one finger, like God is signing the deal. You'll do this, he says, or you'll go back to the yard where men like you don't last. Andy nods, because nodding is safer than dying. So Andy builds ledgers that lie beautifully. Shell names, fake accounts, clean lines that hide dirty rivers. And Shawshank rewards him with a quieter cell, a locked office, and the kind of safety that feels like a leash. Late nights, when the prison finally hushes, Red sometimes hears a faint scraping stone against steel, coming from Andy's corner. Not frantic, not desperate, patient, like a man counting days with dust. One day, Red asks, "What keeps you going?" Andy looks at him, eyes steady. Hope. Red laughs, but it's uneasy. In Shawshank, hope can get you killed. A lot of movies want to be comforting. The Shawshank Redemption earns it the hard way by trapping you in a world built to grind hope into dust, then proving, scene by scene, that hope can be a discipline. That's the fingerprint of Frank Darabont's directing, a storyteller who believes emotion lands harder when you refuse to cheat. In 1994, he wasn't yet the guy who made Prison, Catharsis Cinema. He was a screenwriter stepping into the director's chair with a debut that plays like it was made by someone with nothing to prove except taste, patience, and control. Darabont's creative genesis starts with a Stephen King novella, short, lean, and deceptively simple. The obvious path would have been to movie it up, louder violence, bigger twists, more courtroom fireworks, the usual prison movie adrenaline. Darabont goes the other direction. His vision is classical, almost old-fashioned, in the best sense. Let time do the work. Shawshank isn't structured like an escape thriller. It's structured like a life. Years don't pass through montage for convenience. They pass with weight, and you feel that weight settle into the characters' faces. That decision shapes everything you remember about the film's tone. Darabont treats Shawshank State Penitentiary like a weather system. Routine, cruelty, silence, small mercies, then routine again. He doesn't frame prison as a theme park of brutality. He frames it as an institution designed to erase individuality. You can feel it in how scenes begin and end. Men lined up, counted, moved, processed. The drama comes from tiny rebellions against that machine. An education, a friendship, a private goal. It's humanist filmmaking, but with calluses. The most radical choice is how Darabont positions Andy Dufresne. In lesser hands, Andy becomes a cool hero wisecracking, dominant, always one step ahead. Here, Andy's power is quieter and more unsettling, calm, meticulous, almost unreadable. Darabont directs him like an absence the prison can't fully fill in. That's why the story sticks. You're not watching a man conquer Shawshank through force. You're watching him refuse to let Shawshank define the terms of his inner life. That's a different kind of cinematic masculinity. Less swagger, more endurance. Then there's Red, the film's heartbeat and its method. Darabont's vision leans hard into voiceover, not as lazy explanation, but as memory. Red's narration turns the movie into a recollection, a testimony, a campfire story told by someone who survived long enough to make meaning out of the years. That's why Shawshank feels intimate even when it's sweeping across decades. Darabont wants you inside the emotional archive of this place, what it smelled like, what it sounded like, what it did to people. The voiceover isn't seasoning, it's structure. Visually, Darabont builds a world that looks lived in rather than stylized. The prison has the dull permanence of stone, the kind of architecture that doesn't just hold bodies, it holds time. He and cinematographer Roger Deakins, already a master of naturalism, keep the camera patient, letting compositions breathe so the audience can scan faces, corners, background behavior. Watch how often the frame contains layers. Bars, windows, gates inside gates. Like the image itself is institutionalized. Even when scenes open up, there's usually a line, a boundary, a reminder of control. Darabont's collaboration style also shows in how the film balances sentiment with restraint. The story has moments that could have tipped into syrup. Big speeches, big tears, big message. Beats. He keeps pulling it back. When the film goes emotional, it does it through accumulation, a library slowly built, a man aging out of anger, a friendship deepening through ordinary conversation. And when the movie does let itself soar, it feels earned because it's rare. That push-pull hope, then the world slaps it down, then hope again creates the film's addictive rhythm. The key is that Darabont never treats hope as a motivational poster. He treats it as contraband. Something you hide, protect, smuggle to a friend when they're at their lowest. That's why Shawshank has become a comfort watch for so many people. It's not comforting because it pretends life is fair. It's comforting because it insists meaning can be built inside unfairness. And that philosophy doesn't come from plot mechanics. It comes from a director choosing restraint over spectacle, character over gimmick, and time over speed. And once you see that vision, the next question is unavoidable. How did a relatively compact King novella get transformed into a screenplay that feels this expansive, this perfectly paced, this quotable without feeling written for quotes? That blueprint is where the real architecture starts. The opening is a thesis, not a hook. Most prison films start with the prison chains, gates, men yelling, a hard cut to violence. Shawshank starts with a mood, night, rain, a parked car, and a man in a suit holding a gun like it weighs more than metal. The trial that follows isn't there to build a mystery, it's there to plant a lifelong question. Is Andy guilty, or is he simply doomed? And here's the smart part. The movie doesn't treat that as a whodunit. The evidence is presented in a way that feels plausible enough to convict him, while Andy's demeanor feels controlled enough to make you wonder if control is innocence or calculation. That ambiguity is fuel. It keeps you watching Andy like the prison watches him, trying to read him, trying to label him. Red's narration turns scenes into memory. The narration isn't just commentary. It's a structural tool that solves a hard problem. How do you make decades feel cinematic without rushing? Red's voice doesn't describe what's already obvious. It gives you the texture of survival. What matters, what sticks, what becomes folklore behind bars. The effect is that scenes play like stories passed from one man to another, which is exactly how prison time works. Events become legends because legends are easier to carry than grief. And the screenplay uses Red's voice to guide your attention away from what happens next, toward what this meant. That's why you can rewatch the movie and it still hits, because it isn't suspense-driven, it's meaning-driven. Shawshank is introduced like a machine. Andy's arrival is written with almost documentary rhythm, intake, stripping identity, the first walk through the yard. It's efficient, but it's also dehumanizing by design. The dialogue from guards and officials isn't supervillain speech. It's procedural. That's scarier because it suggests the cruelty isn't personal, it's institutional. Then comes the first night sequence, which is crucial for two reasons. It establishes that new fish are entertainment for people who've been starved of novelty. It shows Andy's defining trait. He doesn't perform fear the way the prison expects. The screenplay is careful here. It implies danger without sensationalizing it, and it frames the moment as a lesson. Shawshank will test you, not only physically, but psychologically. It wants you to react. Andy's refusal to react becomes his first tiny victory. The friendship is built through negotiation, not instant bonding. One of the most believable things about Shawshank is how slowly Andy and Red connect. It isn't two guys become best friends. It's a transaction that becomes trust. Andy asks for a rock hammer. Red says he can get it. That's it. Small request, small risk, small window into character. And what does Andy want it for? Not a weapon, not escape, a hobby, a private interior life. That detail is screenplay-level genius. It tells you Andy's mind is already living somewhere the prison can't reach. Even better, Red doesn't become a sidekick, he becomes a lens. The screenplay gives Red the emotional journey that many prison films give the protagonist, learning to believe in something again. Andy's arc is about protecting hope. Red's is about accepting it. Early supporting characters aren't extras. They're angles on survival. Within the first stretch, Darabont seeds multiple philosophies of coping. The men who harden into routine. The men who turn pain into jokes. The men who cling to small status games because it's all they control. This matters because it makes Shawshank feel like an ecosystem. Andy isn't the only interesting person there. He's a new element introduced into a system that resists change, and the screenplay keeps returning to one quiet question. What does prison do to a person's sense of self over time? The dialogue is simple, but it's doing double work. People remember Shawshank as quotable, but the writing rarely sounds like it's trying to be iconic. The lines hit because they're clear moral statements, spoken in a place designed to destroy clarity. When characters talk about hope, freedom, getting busy living, it doesn't feel like a TED Talk. It feels like a man making a choice out loud so he can hear himself believe it. Captain Hadley, violence is policy. Captain Hadley isn't written like a cartoon bully. He's written like a working part of the system, someone who believes fear is management. That's what makes him terrifying. In Shawshank, violence isn't an occasional outburst, it's a language. Hadley's presence tells every inmate, the rules are not just enforced, they're performed. And notice how the film positions him early, not in private villain scenes, but in public moments where everyone learns what the boundaries are. The message is simple. Your body doesn't fully belong to you here. The prison can take it, punish it, correct it, and then return you to the routine like nothing happened. Warden Norton, the mask of righteousness. Then comes the more sophisticated monster, Warden Samuel Norton. If Hadley is blunt force, Norton is ideology. He's the kind of authority figure who wraps control in language about God, discipline, and doing things the right way. That hypocrisy is the point. Norton doesn't need to shout. He defines reality. His power is that he can label cruelty as order and greed as virtue. The screenplay makes Norton scary because he doesn't act like he's doing wrong. He acts like he's defending something sacred. That's a real-world detail, and it lands hard. The worst systems don't always feel evil from the inside. They feel necessary. The rooftop sequence. Hope arrives disguised as beer. One of the most iconic sequences. Andy helping the guards with taxes on the rooftop doesn't just exist for charm. It's a perfect example of how Shawshank does emotional storytelling through practical action. On paper, it's simple. Andy offers financial advice, earns goodwill, and gets beers for the crew. But psychologically, it's the first time the film shows Andy changing the prison's weather. He doesn't do it by fighting. He does it by making himself useful in a way that creates leverage. And the beers matter for more than celebration. The scene is staged like a tiny miracle. Men on a roof, sky above them, sunlight, laughter. Almost like they've stepped out of the prison for 15 minutes. Andy doesn't even drink. That choice is crucial. It tells you his satisfaction isn't the beer, it's the result. A brief moment of dignity for others, and a quiet proof that the institution can be bent. This is where the film introduces its most dangerous idea. Competence can be a form of freedom. But it also plants the warning. The system doesn't reward competence out of kindness. It rewards it because competence is profitable. Protection comes with a price. After the rooftop, the power dynamic shifts. Andy isn't just another inmate. He becomes a resource. That has two sides. It offers him a shield from random brutality. It paints a target on him because resources get controlled. The screenplay is really honest about that trade-off. Andy's intelligence doesn't magically solve his suffering. It just changes the shape of it. He moves from being threatened by chaos to being threatened by ownership. The prison deciding what he is for. The sisters. Violence that's systemic, not sensational. The film handles the assaults by the sisters in a way that's important to its tone. It's present, it's horrifying, but it's not exploited as spectacle. The point isn't shock value. It's to show how prison creates a hierarchy where some men survive by preying on others, and where the institution often looks away until it becomes inconvenient. When Andy finally finds a measure of protection through Hadley's intervention, it's not framed as justice. It's framed as another transaction, violence used to restore order, not to defend a human being. That detail keeps the film grounded in its central critique. Shawshank doesn't protect people because it cares. It protects the smooth functioning of Shawshank. The inside-out economy begins. This is the stretch where Darabont quietly expands the story's scope. Shawshank isn't separate from the outside world. It's connected to it through money, labor, and influence. When Andy starts working with the guards, and then with the warden's interests, the prison starts to feel like a corporation. One that uses confinement as its business model. So when Andy begins writing letters to the state, over and over, week after week, it's not just persistence. It's a philosophy. I will outlast your indifference. The screenplay makes this process feel both funny and brutal. Funny because the idea of one man pestering the government into submission has a stubborn charm. Brutal because it shows how hard it is to win something basic when you're inside the machine. Andy's victory is never framed as charity. It's framed as a system finally giving in because it got tired. Brooks and the quiet horror of institutionalized. This is also where the film deepens its emotional argument through Brooks Hatlin. Brooks isn't just a side character, he's a warning label for the entire story. Brooks has spent so long inside that freedom becomes terrifying. Not because he doesn't want it, but because he doesn't know how to exist without the rules. That's the idea the film plants gently but firmly. A prison doesn't only keep you in. If you stay long enough, it can reprogram you to fear the world outside. Even before the film reaches Brooks's turning point, Darabont seeds it through behavior. Brooks clings to the library, to routine, to predictable days. He's not weak, he's adapted. And that's what makes it tragic, because adaptation is what you're supposed to do to survive. So the library isn't just Andy's project. It's also Brooks's identity. It's one of the few spaces in Shawshank where a man can feel like more than a number. Education becomes Andy's real escape plan. Here's a subtle screenplay choice. Andy doesn't just build the library for himself. He uses it to build others. Tommy, for example, isn't introduced as a plot device first. He's introduced as energy. A younger guy with a loud personality, someone who still carries the outside world in his posture. Andy teaching Tommy for the GED is written like a small mentorship, but thematically, it's huge. Andy is creating mobility in a place designed to make people static. He's proving that hope can be taught, not just felt. And he's investing in futures that aren't even his. That last part matters. It separates Andy from the typical smart guy survives prison archetype. Andy isn't only surviving, he's cultivating. That's why the audience roots for him so hard. He doesn't hoard his light. Norton learns the library isn't rehabilitation. It's leverage. But Shawshank never lets a good thing remain pure for long. As soon as the library becomes a success, Norton recognizes the real value, not in books, but in Andy's competence. This is where the story pivots into its most cynical, realistic territory. Institutions love reform when it makes them look moral, and they love talent when it makes them money. Andy becomes a symbol of progress for the prison, while also becoming the engine of Norton's private operation. The writing here is sharp because it shows how corruption rarely announces itself. It creeps in through favors. Help this guard. Look at this paperwork. Handle these numbers. And soon, the warden isn't requesting. He's expecting. The double bind, Andy's gifts protect him and trap him. Andy's growing influence inside Shawshank is a trap disguised as privilege. The more valuable he becomes to Norton and the guards, the safer he is from random violence. But the less free he is to be his own person. His labor, his mind, his time, all of it becomes assigned. This is one of the film's smartest psychological moves. It doesn't just show oppression as suffering. It shows oppression as comfort that costs you ownership of yourself. Andy is given a desk, quieter work, a role. And the role comes with invisible handcuffs. Why this section feels warm, even as the danger increases. Part 4 is packed with some of the movie's most uplifting images. Books arriving, men learning, the library becoming a sanctuary. That warmth is intentional. Darabont wants you to feel what's being built so you understand what's at risk. Because the moment Shawshank allows you a pocket of dignity, it can also threaten to take it away. That's how control works here. Give you something human, then remind you who granted permission. Tommy's real function, not youth, but disruption. Tommy has been a shot of chaotic life in an otherwise controlled environment. But the screenplay's real move is turning him into a living contradiction. Proof that the outside world is still connected to Shawshank, and that information can travel in ways the warden can't fully predict. When Tommy shares what he knows about a different man potentially responsible for the murders Andy was convicted of, it plays like the first time the story offers Andy something close to daylight. Notice the writing choice here. The revelation isn't staged as a huge twist with thunder and music. It's staged as a conversation, the way real life-changing information often arrives, casually, almost accidentally. That makes it hit harder. Because suddenly, Andy's quiet endurance isn't just inspiring, it's tragic. If he's innocent, and the film makes you increasingly believe he is, then every year in Shawshank isn't hard time. It's stolen life. Andy's hope stops being private. Here's the shift. Andy has always protected hope like contraband, something internal. Now hope becomes actionable. And that changes Andy's posture. He becomes almost urgent. This is important because Shawshank rarely lets Andy show big emotion. When he finally approaches Norton with the possibility of reopening the case, you can feel what's underneath his calm, a man carefully trying not to tremble while asking the world to admit it made a mistake. And Norton's response tells you everything about his character. Norton doesn't reject truth. He rejects uncertainty. A fair authority figure would see Tommy's information as a moral emergency. Norton sees it as a logistical inconvenience. Because Andy isn't just an inmate to Norton. Andy is infrastructure. He's the brain behind financial schemes, the engine behind a respectable public image, the quiet miracle worker who makes Norton look effective. So when Andy asks for justice, Norton hears, "I might lose my advantage." This is the film's sharpest critique. Corruption doesn't always look like greed with a cigar. Sometimes it looks like a man quoting scripture while protecting his own interests. Norton's rejection is not only cruel, it's ideological. He's telling Andy the institution's version of reality is more important than the truth. That's the moment the film stops being only about survival and becomes about power rewriting morality. The story punishes Andy for believing. One of the most devastating things Shawshank does is show that hope, once spoken aloud, becomes a target. After Andy pushes back, after he insists, he's punished, not for violence, not for rule-breaking in the usual sense, but for threatening the system's stability. And the punishment is designed to be psychological, isolation, silence, the kind of treatment meant to make a person shrink back into obedience. Darabont frames this in a way that reinforces the film's main idea. Prison isn't only about bars. It's about controlling what you think you're allowed to want. The Mozart scene, a rebellion made of beauty. Then the film detonates one of its most famous sequences. Andy plays an opera record over the loudspeakers. On a plot level, it's Andy breaks the rules. On a thematic level, it's Andy doing something far more radical, introducing beauty where the system relies on bleakness. That music floods the yard like a weather change. For a brief moment, the prison can't keep the outside world out. The men stop moving like units and start moving like individuals again. Looking up, pausing, remembering they have inner lives. And that's why Norton reacts so strongly. Because beauty is uncontrollable. You can't quantify it, can't file it, can't turn it into a profit scheme. It reminds people they're human, and human beings are harder to manage than prisoners. The screenplay makes sure you understand. This act isn't just defiance, it's communication. Andy is telling everyone, Red included, I am still here. Red's philosophy gets challenged. Red has always been the film's realist, the guy who knows how things work, who warns Andy that hope can be dangerous. Part 5 is where Red's worldview gets pressured from both sides. Andy's renewed belief in justice is contagious. The system's retaliation proves Red's caution wasn't paranoia. That tension is the emotional engine moving forward. The film isn't asking, is Red right or is Andy right? It's asking the more painful question. Norton's order reveals its real face. Once Tommy's information threatens Andy's conviction, Norton stops acting like a warden and starts acting like an owner defending property. The film makes it painfully obvious. Andy isn't a human life to Norton. He's an asset. And when an asset tries to leave, you don't negotiate. You contain the damage. That's why the punishment doesn't feel like discipline. It feels like a warning to everyone watching, don't reach for justice, it's not available here. And the story underlines how cold that logic is with what happens to Tommy. The film doesn't linger for shock, but the message is unmistakable. This prison will erase obstacles. Not because it's impulsive, but because it's efficient. Solitary becomes the film's emotional pressure chamber. Andy's time in solitary confinement is one of the most important stretches in the whole movie, even though it's largely off-screen. Darabont and the screenplay do something smart. Instead of turning it into a dramatic breakdown sequence, they make it a vacuum, a gap where other characters fill the silence with dread. Because in Shawshank, silence is never neutral. Silence is what happens when the system is working. The real tension isn't what is Andy doing in there. It's what is this place doing to him. Red, especially, starts reading the situation the way anyone would in a prison. Isolation plus heartbreak equals danger. And the film lets you sit with that fear without exploiting it. Andy returns, and he's strangely calm. When Andy finally comes back to the yard, the movie gives you a moment that feels almost supernatural. He doesn't stumble out shattered. He's bruised by the experience, sure, but spiritually, he's steel. And that's where Shawshank's thesis sharpens. The prison can control Andy's body. It cannot fully control his mind unless he gives it permission. Andy tells Red something that hits like a whispered manifesto. The idea that there are things inside you that can't be taken. Memory, imagination, music. The private part of you that doesn't belong to the institution. He isn't being poetic for fun. He's explaining survival strategy. And in a movie that's been about time, routine, and dehumanization, this becomes the core principle. Hope isn't a feeling Andy occasionally has. It's a practice he maintains. Red and Andy split the movie's worldview in half. This is where the film's two philosophies finally collide in full. Red believes in realism as self-defense. Don't want too much. Don't dream too loudly. Don't give the place a reason to break you. Andy believes realism without hope is just another kind of prison. Their arguments here aren't just dialogue. They're the movie debating itself. And Darabont directs it with intimacy, close conversations, quiet pauses, that sense that both men are right, and that being right doesn't automatically keep you safe. When Andy pushes the get busy living mindset, it isn't motivational fluff, it's a dare. A challenge to Red's long habit of emotional self-protection. The breadcrumbs, Andy starts asking for odd things. Part 6 also begins planting the details that rewatchers obsess over. Andy makes small requests, practical, specific items that don't seem dramatic in the moment, and the screenplay lets them pass almost casually, because that's how long-term plans survive, by looking like nothing. What's brilliant is how Darabont uses Red's perspective to create misdirection. Red is the audience's stand-in, so when Red assumes Andy's requests might be signs of despair, we feel that worry too. But the film never confirms that fear. It just lets it hang there, unsettling and unresolved. And that unresolved tension is doing heavy lifting. It keeps the story taut without needing action scenes. The suspense becomes psychological. What is Andy preparing for? Norton tightens the leash and accidentally shows his weakness. Meanwhile, Norton doubles down on using Andy for financial schemes. The more the warden depends on Andy's brain to keep his operation clean, the more he convinces himself Andy is trapped. This is the classic villain error, and the film treats it like institutional arrogance rather than personal stupidity. If the system owns your labor, it assumes it owns your future. The warden's empire feels bigger. And that's the trap. Norton's operation expands until it's practically a parallel economy. The prison becomes less like a correctional facility and more like a business hub where labor, contracts, and cash flow all run through one man's moral fantasy: I'm righteous, therefore I deserve the profit. The screenplay's smartest move here is refusing to frame this as a twist. It's presented like the natural end result of unchecked authority. Shawshank didn't become corrupt overnight. It became corrupt the way real institutions do, through convenience, silence, and the steady normalization of wrongdoing. And that scale is exactly what blinds Norton. The bigger the machine gets, the more he assumes it's unstoppable. He starts confusing power with permanence. Andy's behavior becomes unreadable on purpose. This is where the film leans into misdirection, but not in a cheap gotcha way. Andy begins acting in ways that, from Red's point of view, feel troubling. He's quieter, more inward. He asks for things that, out of context, sound ominous, like a length of rope. The genius is that Darabont filters these moments through Red's anxiety. Because Red has seen what Shawshank can do to a person's spirit, he interprets Andy's requests as signs of collapse. And if Red thinks it, the audience thinks it. That's how the movie creates suspense without action. It weaponizes concern. It makes you fear not what the prison will do, but what hopelessness might do. Red's fear is the real cliffhanger. Red has always been the realist, the man who learned survival by shrinking his expectations. But Part 7 shows that he's changed. He cares too much now to stay emotionally armored. So when he worries, Andy is nearing a breaking point. It isn't just plot tension. It's emotional proof that their friendship has become Red's anchor. If Andy falls, Red loses more than a friend. He loses the thing Andy represents, the possibility that a person can endure without surrendering their inner self. This is why the film's friendship works so powerfully. It isn't sentimental, best buddies writing. It's two men slowly becoming each other's evidence that life can still contain meaning. The film's use of ordinary scenes becomes strategic. Another subtle trick, Darabont loads this section with everyday prison routines, paperwork, brief conversations, familiar spaces. On first watch, it feels like the story is simply continuing its natural pace. On a rewatch, you realize it's camouflage. Because ordinary scenes are where long-term plans hide. A dramatic plan would draw attention. Andy's power is that he never announces his turning points. He just keeps moving with the same careful precision he's always had, so no one can tell when routine has become preparation. That's why Part 7 feels like you're watching someone pack a suitcase in a house that's on fire. Calm hands, controlled breathing, and no explanation. The tonal shadow, Brooks as a warning that still echoes. Even though Brooks's story happened earlier, its meaning hangs over this part like a ghost. The idea that prisons don't only confine bodies, they can reshape identity until the outside world feels unlivable. The film treats this theme with a quiet sadness, not shock. It's not trying to be sensational. It's showing a human cost that Red is terrified of repeating. That's why Red reacts so strongly to Andy's rope request. In Red's mind, despair isn't hypothetical. It's history. And importantly, Shawshank doesn't romanticize that despair. It treats it as a tragedy of damage. What happens when a life is squeezed into institutional shape for too long? Norton's blind spot. He thinks fear equals control. What's fascinating is that Norton believes he has Andy cornered. He's used solitary confinement, threats, and total authority. From his perspective, Andy is contained, an inmate with no legal options, no allies with power, no believable escape route. But that belief reveals Norton's deepest misunderstanding. He thinks people only escape physically. Andy has been escaping psychologically for years, through books, through music, through planning, through patience. Norton sees Andy as a clerk. Norton never sees Andy as an architect. Andy starts behaving like a man closing accounts. The screenplay makes Andy's final stretch in Shawshank feel like someone tidying up loose ends. He moves through familiar spaces with a calm that reads as either peace or exhaustion. He talks to Red with a slightly different tone, still measured, still quiet, but with a faint emotional pressure underneath, as if he's saying things he wants remembered. And Darabont's direction amplifies that. Andy isn't framed like a man planning an action movie escape. He's framed like a man who has made a decision so fully that it's already real inside him. The Mexico conversation, hope as a destination, not a metaphor. When Andy speaks about a place like Zihuatanejo, it's one of the film's most important tonal shifts. For much of the movie, hope has been presented as internal music, books, memory, imagination. Now Andy describes hope as geographic, a real town, real ocean, real sunlight. That matters because it changes the stakes of belief. Red has always treated hope like a dangerous fantasy. Andy treats it like a plan with coordinates. And here's the emotional brilliance. Andy doesn't beg Red to believe. He just offers the picture, like he's planting a seed. If Red can imagine it, then Red can survive long enough to reach it. This is where their friendship becomes almost spiritual. Not romantic, not sentimental, but deeply human. Andy is trying to leave Red with more than memories. He's trying to leave him a direction. Red's dread becomes the audience's dread. Red has lived long enough in Shawshank to recognize patterns. Men talk big about the future right before the future disappoints them. Men cling to dreams right before the system crushes them. So when Andy gets more specific, when he talks about finding a certain place, later, Red doesn't hear a promise. He hears a goodbye. This is the screenplay using Red as emotional misdirection again. Red's fear is rational, and that rationality makes it contagious. You begin watching Andy with the same worry. Is he about to do something irreversible? The film doesn't exploit that fear. It uses it to sharpen the emotional knife, because it knows the reveal is coming and it wants you feeling fragile right before it hands you release. Norton's final night of arrogance. While Andy's energy becomes almost serene, Norton's becomes smug. The warden sleeps like a man who believes the world is settled. His power feels absolute. His corruption has worked for years, and it has never truly been challenged in a way that costs him. That contrast is the fuse. Darabont makes sure you see the institutional confidence. Guards do their rounds, the prison locks down, the nightly routine rolls forward like always. Shawshank has the self-assurance of a fortress, and fortresses are most vulnerable when they forget to imagine the impossible. Cinematic tension, the film stops chasing events and starts chasing inevitability. This is why Part 8 is so effective. It doesn't build suspense through clues you can easily solve. It builds suspense through vibe. Andy feels resolved. Red feels terrified. Red feels terrified. The prison feels complacent. Those three feelings can't coexist for long without something snapping. And the screenplay is precise about not overplaying it. No wink to the audience, no dramatic, "this is it" signals. Just ordinary scenes arranged like dominoes. The symbolism of routine, Shawshank's greatest weakness, is repetition. A major theme returns here. The prison depends on repetition. Count men. Lock doors. Turn keys. Do paperwork. Repeat forever. That routine is meant to keep inmates predictable and keep authority unquestioned. But routine can also create blind spots. If every day looks the same, you stop seeing the details. You stop noticing changes. You stop expecting surprise. The absence is louder than any explosion. When Andy doesn't appear, the film doesn't immediately cut to how. It cuts to confusion. Guards double-check. Officers bark. The warden's certainty starts to crack. The screenplay understands something basic about suspense. The most frightening thing for a controlling system isn't rebellion. It's a gap in control. A prison can handle misbehavior. It's built for that. What it can't handle is a moment where the machine doesn't have an answer. So the first wave of tension isn't action-driven. It's institutional disbelief. He can't be gone. Therefore he isn't. Therefore we must find the mistake. And that arrogance makes the reveal sweeter, because the prison's confidence becomes part of the punishment. The poster moment, cinema's cleanest magic trick. Then comes the image that turned into legend, the poster on Andy's wall. On first watch, it's almost funny in its simplicity, like the film is letting you experience what the guards feel, a sudden click in the brain. A detail you've seen 100 times finally rearranging itself into meaning. But what makes it brilliant is how patient the movie has been in setting it up. The poster wasn't introduced as a "this will matter later" clue. It was introduced as normal prison life, men decorating their cages with dreams. So when it becomes the hiding place for a secret, the payoff isn't just clever. It's thematic. Andy used fantasy, an image of the outside, to conceal the most real act of freedom possible. That's Darabont's style in a nutshell, symbolism that also functions as engineering. The escape is a character reveal, not a stunt. A lesser film would treat the escape as a sudden gear shift into thriller mode. Shawshank treats it as the final proof of who Andy has always been. He's meticulous. He's patient. He's willing to endure time as a tool. He understands systems well enough to exploit their blind spots. So the escape isn't. Andy becomes a new person. It's Andy finally uses everything he's been quietly practicing for years. That's why the moment lands like destiny. It feels like the culmination of a philosophy, not a surprise twist. And crucially, Darabont doesn't turn it into a macho victory lap. The tone is almost reverent, like the film is honoring the idea that freedom isn't won in one dramatic burst. It's constructed over time, in secret, with discipline. The warden's unraveling. Control has consequences. Once Andy is gone, the spotlight flips onto Norton, and suddenly the film turns into a consequence machine. This is where Shawshank becomes deeply satisfying, in a way that doesn't feel cheap, because it's not. Villain gets punished by fate. Its villain is destroyed by the very system he built. Norton's power depended on a few assumptions. The prison is sealed. His authority is unquestionable. Andy is permanently contained and permanently useful. Paperwork can be controlled. Andy's escape doesn't just break out of a cell. It breaks the logic holding Norton's world together. The financial schemes that once made Norton feel untouchable become liabilities. His careful image, God-fearing, disciplined, righteous, suddenly looks like a costume. And here's the most brutal irony: Norton loved paperwork when it was a weapon he could aim at others. Now paperwork becomes the thing that implicates him. The same bureaucracy that kept inmates powerless turns into a paper trail that can't be prayed away. Inside Out. Revenge. Andy doesn't hit back. He exposes. What makes Andy's victory so emotionally clean is that it isn't fueled by cruelty. It's fueled by clarity. Andy doesn't need to become violent to defeat violence. He defeats Shawshank by doing what Shawshank cannot tolerate, making the truth legible. That's why the aftermath plays like an unmasking. The prison is no longer a closed world with its own rules. It's now visible to the outside. And visibility is the enemy of corruption. This is also where the story rewards the audience for paying attention. The film has been showing you Andy's skills for hours: banking, taxes, systems thinking, patience. Now those skills become the tools of liberation. It's not magic. It's character consistency. Red's reaction, the emotional payoff, lands where it should. But the escape isn't the real climax. Red's response is, because Red is the film's emotional baseline, if Red can't believe in this miracle, neither can we. So when Red realizes Andy actually did it, actually walked out of the story, Shawshank tried to lock him inside. The moment hits like oxygen. Parole is performance. The system wants the right words, not the truth. Red's parole hearings are written with bitter precision. They aren't conversations, they're rituals. Red sits in front of a panel and repeats what the system expects: remorse, reform, correctness. The first times, the system hears a smart inmate saying the right things and doesn't buy it. Not because they can detect his soul, but because parole in this world is less about rehabilitation and more about risk management. Then, when Red finally stops performing, when he speaks with exhausted honesty, the system accepts him. That's the irony. It takes decades, but the truth finally sounds credible, because it comes from a man who's too tired to sell it. It's not sentimental. It's quietly savage. The system delays freedom until freedom no longer feels like a threat. Freedom isn't a door opening. It's a silence you have to fill. When Red steps outside, Darabont doesn't frame it like triumph. He frames it like disorientation. The open world isn't automatically comforting. It's loud, fast, unfamiliar. Red has spent so long in an environment where every hour is structured that the lack of structure becomes frightening. And this is where the film makes one of its most mature statements: people can miss their cages. Not because the cage was good, but because it was known. Red's voiceover, and Morgan Freeman's delivery, turns this into something universal. It's not only about prison, it's about any life so controlled that choice feels like a burden. The outside world mirrors the inside. Routine returns in a new costume. Red's new job and living situation echo Brooks's earlier storyline, and that parallel is intentional. Same kind of work, same lonely room, same sense of being watched. Only now it's by bosses, clocks, and social rules instead of guards. The film isn't saying the outside is just as bad as prison. It's saying institutionalization doesn't end when the sentence ends. The prison has left an imprint on how Red interprets reality. That's why the simplest tasks, crossing a street, choosing what to do after work, carry weight. Freedom isn't just access, it's a skill. Brooks's shatter returns as a warning. Red can't ignore Brooks's story. Earlier wasn't a detour. It was a foreshadowing of Red's psychological cliff. And part 10 is where that becomes explicit. Red recognizes the path he's on. The same loneliness, the same sense of being out of place, the same temptation to treat the outside as unbearable. Importantly, Shawshank handles this theme without graphic indulgence or romanticizing despair. It frames it as damage. What happens when a human being is trained for years to live without agency, then suddenly handed agency with no tools to carry it? Red isn't weak for struggling. He's injured in a way that's invisible. Andy's gift isn't money, it's instruction. And then the movie delivers one of its most beautiful narrative moves. Andy left Red a path. Not just emotionally, keep hope, but practically specific steps, a location, a reason to move forward. That matters because Red's problem isn't only sadness, it's inertia. Institutionalization makes you stay where you're told to stay. Andy's message is an antidote. Go. Choose. Move. It's like Andy is reaching back through time, refusing to let Shawshank claim Red too. And the screenplay keeps this grounded. It's not magic friendship. It's a lifeline built out of planning. Andy doing for Red what he always did best, creating a route through a system that expects you to stop trying. The final emotional pivot, I hope. Red's choice to take a chance, literally to violate the safest, most obedient path, is the movie's true victory. Because Red has been trained to survive by compliance, Hope asks him to do the opposite, risk disappointment. When Red says he hopes, it lands like the end of an illness. Not a guarantee, a willingness. That's what Shawshank has been building toward all along, not escape as action, but hope as decision. The film's ending is built like a promise, not a victory lap. Notice how the final sequences aren't structured around celebration. They're structured around movement. Red gets paroled, steps into the outside world, and the movie follows him through a quiet, almost haunted transition. Darabont understands that freedom isn't a single moment. It's a process, and it can be disorienting. That's why the ending feels like an exhale instead of a cheer. You don't watch Red win. You watch Red attempt to live. The film treats that attempt as heroic because it's harder than it looks. Shawshank trained him for obedience. The outside world demands choice. And choice, after decades of being told what to do, can feel like standing on a cliff. Darabont's restraint, he never lets the story become revenge. Porn. A key reason the conclusion hits cleanly is that Darabont keeps the tone morally consistent. The film could indulge in extended humiliation of its villains. It could overstay the gotcha. Instead, it frames consequences as inevitable collapse, like gravity finally catching up. That matters. It preserves the film's humanism. Andy doesn't become the cruelty he suffered. He defeats Shawshank by exposing it, not by mirroring it. The victory is ethical, not just clever. The movie is basically saying, you don't heal injustice by becoming another version of it. You heal it by bringing it into the light. The outside world scenes, the second half of the theme, Brooks's earlier story and Red's awareness of it, isn't there for sadness. It's there to complete the film's argument about institutional damage. The prison doesn't only take years, it can take confidence, identity, ease. So when Red follows Andy's breadcrumb trail, the stakes aren't, will he find Andy? The stakes are, will Red choose life, even when life is unfamiliar? That's why the "I hope" shift is so powerful. It's not a slogan. It's a man who spent decades surviving by lowering expectations, finally allowing himself to want something again, even if it risks disappointment. Hope, for Red, isn't naive. It's bravery. Why the final reunion works when it could have been corny. Let's be honest, on paper, the beach ending is dangerous. Two friends reunite in a bright, beautiful place after years of misery. That's the kind of thing that can feel manufactured if the film hasn't earned it. But Shawshank earns it through three careful choices. Time. The movie made you live with these characters long enough that peace feels like a rare substance, not a default reward. Tone. The film never pretends that pain didn't happen. It simply refuses to let pain be the only truth. Simplicity. The reunion isn't staged as melodrama. It's calm, almost quiet. Like the story understands that real healing doesn't always arrive with fireworks. It arrives with presence. That quietness is the trick. The ending doesn't scream happy. It whispers possible. Craft details that make the catharsis land. Darabont's direction stays classical to the end. Steady pacing, clean emotional emphasis, no desperate editing tricks. Roger Deakins' cinematography helps complete the thematic arc. Shawshank's images are heavy with stone, shadow, and containment. The final images breathe with openness and distance. The visual language changes the way the characters' bodies feel in the frame. In prison, they're placed like objects. Outside, they're placed like people. And Thomas Newman's score, gentle, reflective rather than triumphant, is crucial. It doesn't tell you to clap. It tells you to feel. It holds the ending in a kind of fragile warmth, like the film knows peace is real and also knows it took too long. What the film ultimately argues about friendship. For all its talk about hope, the movie's most convincing argument is about friendship as survival infrastructure. Red and Andy's bond isn't flashy. It's built out of conversation as medicine, patience as loyalty, belief borrowed from someone else when you run out of your own. Why the film's popularity feels personal. Most beloved films offer escape. Shawshank offers something different: endurance. It doesn't pretend suffering is noble, and it doesn't claim the world is fair. What it insists quietly, repeatedly, is that meaning can be constructed inside unfairness, and that a person can protect an inner self even when everything external is controlled. That's why it plays like a companion rather than a spectacle. People don't just quote it because the lines are catchy. They quote it because the lines sound like tools. Rewatchability is built into the design. Part of the legacy is mechanical. The movie is engineered for rewatches. The pacing is novelistic. The scenes are clean, and the story moves through time without losing you. But the deeper reason is emotional. The film contains two viewing experiences at once. On first watch, you live in Red's uncertainty, fear, skepticism, dread. On rewatch, you live in Andy's patience, calm, strategy, long-term faith. And that duality is rare. It means the movie can meet you at different ages and different life stages. When you're younger, you may be pulled toward the triumph of the escape. When you're older, you may be pulled toward Red's slower miracle, learning to live again. What modern audiences sometimes misunderstand. Because Shawshank is comforting, people sometimes flatten it into a feel-good film. But the comfort isn't cheap. The movie earns warmth through time, loss, and institutional cruelty. It's not saying everything works out. It's saying something tougher. Even if the world refuses to be fair, you can still choose who you are. Even if the system wins many rounds, it doesn't have to win your mind. That difference matters. It's why the film doesn't feel like motivational content. It feels like witness. The film's real subject: institutional power, not just prison. One reason Shawshank stays relevant is that its prison is a specific place, but its system is recognizable everywhere. The story is about how institutions reward obedience, punish inconvenient truth, exploit talent, and disguise greed as order. Norton isn't scary because he's uniquely monstrous. He's scary because he's a type, the authority figure who believes his morality gives him permission to control others. Shawshank becomes a metaphor not because it's vague, but because it's precise. The mechanisms are clear enough to map onto other systems: schools, workplaces, politics, families. Anywhere power protects itself first. Masculinity without the usual noise. Another underappreciated part of the legacy, the film's version of masculinity, is unusually quiet. It's not built on dominance or conquest. It's built on resilience, friendship, emotional restraint that isn't emotional absence, and dignity as a daily practice. Andy doesn't win by becoming harder than the prison. He wins by staying himself longer than the prison can endure. Red doesn't win by becoming fearless. He wins by admitting fear and moving anyway. That's why the film hits so widely. It offers a model of strength that doesn't require cruelty. Why the ending became iconic. The beach reunion matters not just because it's happy, but because it's measured. The movie doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't pretend time wasn't stolen. It simply refuses to let that stolen time be the whole story. The biggest change, the film turns a story into a relationship. King's novella is strong, but Darabont's version makes one choice that changes everything. It centers the emotional spine on Andy and Red as a long-form friendship rather than simply a narrated account of an extraordinary inmate. In the film, Red isn't just the storyteller. He's the subject of the second half. That's why the ending lands so hard. The movie isn't only about Andy escaping a prison, it's about Red escaping an identity. The guy who survives by not believing. Darabont doesn't just adapt plot, he adapts what the plot is for. Red's casting becomes the film's secret superpower. On the page, Red is Irish, hence Red. The film changes that without making a big deal out of it, and it ends up becoming one of the greatest casting choices in modern cinema. Morgan Freeman's voice doesn't just narrate, it stabilizes the movie. Shawshank jumps years, shifts tone, and balances harshness with warmth. Freeman provides continuity like a heartbeat. His calm delivery turns the film's philosophy, hope, time, dignity, into something that feels lived in rather than written. In other words, the movie can afford to be patient because Red's presence makes patience feel meaningful. Darabont's key addition, structure that feels like memory. The novella's narration is already reflective, but the film's structure is even more memory-shaped. It's not simply events in order. It's the moments that would still be vivid after decades. That's why the film highlights specific emotional landmarks, arrival and first night, rooftop beers, the library and education, music over the speakers, parole hearings, the outside world's loneliness. These aren't random cool scenes. They're the kind of moments people remember, because they represent survival turning points. Darabont organizes the story like a man looking back, choosing what mattered most. The escape isn't just clever. It's morally consistent. A lot of prison escape stories become fantasies of domination. The hero outsmarts the guards, humiliates the warden, and the film cheers like it's a sports win. Shawshank is different. Andy's victory is exposure, not cruelty. Even when consequences finally arrive for the prison's leadership, the movie's satisfaction isn't sadistic. It's cleaner than that. It feels like a system collapsing under its own weight, because the film has been arguing the whole time that corruption isn't bad luck. It's a structure that eventually becomes impossible to hide. This moral consistency is what makes the ending cathartic without feeling fake. The hope. Debate is more adult than people give it credit. For some viewers summarize the film as hope always wins. But the movie is actually more complicated and more honest. Red's warning, hope is dangerous, is not portrayed as silly pessimism. It's portrayed as trauma-informed realism. Red has seen what happens when men dream too loudly and then get crushed by reality. The film's point isn't that Red is wrong and Andy is right. It's that Red's worldview protects you from pain. Andy's worldview protects you from becoming empty. That's why their conversations matter so much. They aren't inspirational speeches. They're two survival strategies arguing over the same question. Is it safer to feel less or to risk feeling fully? The movie's most romantic element is time. Not romance in the relationship sense, romance in the storytelling sense. Shawshank treats time like a living force. Years aren't just numbers, they are pressure. The film shows what long time does to posture, voice, confidence, imagination, relationships. That's why the escape hits like a release valve. You're not only happy because Andy is free, you're relieved because the film has made you feel the slow weight of waiting. That's also why the ending with Red matters so much. Andy's escape is a break in time. Red's escape is learning to live after time has changed him. Why this adaptation became the definitive version for many people. A lot of King adaptations work because the premise is strong. This one works because Darabont understands the tone, human, grounded, patient, and emotionally disciplined. He doesn't oversell the drama. He doesn't chase constant action. He trusts the audience to sit inside long feelings. That trust is rare, and it's why the film became more than entertainment. It became a kind of emotional reference point, a movie people recommend not just because it's good, but because it's useful when life feels like a long hallway of locked doors. Deakins' cinematography, prison as geometry, freedom as air. Roger Deakins frames Shawshank like a system. Straight lines, repeating patterns, layered barriers. You constantly see frames within frames, bars, doorways, windows, fences, corridors. It's visual language saying, even when you're in a room, you're still inside something else. Then notice what changes when the film wants you to feel a breath of freedom. Rooftop scene, more sky, more horizon, brighter exposure yard moments, wider compositions, more shared space. Final images, openness, distance, a sense of depth. The prison never allows. The movie doesn't just tell you freedom, it switches the geometry of the world. Lighting and color, hope is never neon. Shawshank's palette lives in stone, dust, muted blue screens, and worn browns. Colors that feel institutional and aged. Even warm. Scenes are rarely saturated. That choice prevents the film from turning inspirational moments into glossy fantasy. Hope appears like a small flame in a cold room, not like a spotlight. The effect is psychological. When warmth arrives, sunlight on the roof, library life, small smiles. It feels precious because it's rare. Darabont's pacing, time is the villain, rhythm is the weapon. Darabont's editing philosophy is patient, but not slow. He's constantly using micro payoffs to keep you moving through years. A favor becomes a relationship. A relationship becomes a system of trust. A system of trust becomes leverage. Leverage becomes freedom. So even when the plot is just life in prison, you're watching a chain of cause and effect. That's why it feels novelistic. The story is built out of accumulated meaning, not constant twists. Voiceover done right, narration is character, not explanation. Red's voiceover is the film's glue. The key craft move, it doesn't merely explain what you can already see. It adds interpretation, tone, and memory. It turns the movie into a lived account rather than a dramatized report. Also, the voiceover lets Darabont jump time without breaking intimacy. Decades pass, but Red keeps you emotionally anchored, like you're hearing the story from someone who survived it. Sound design, the prison is a constant hum of control. Listen to how Shawshank sounds. Keys, gates, footsteps, echoes, whistles, shouted counts. Those aren't background details. They're reminders that the prison speaks through routine. The soundscape is institutional. That's why moments of silence and music hit so hard. When something breaks the normal audio pattern, your body notices before your brain does. Thomas Newman's score. Tenderness without melodrama. Newman's music doesn't push you into emotion. It floats alongside it. The score often feels reflective, even when the story is heavy. Like the music is giving you permission to hold on to humanity while the environment tries to strip it away. This restraint is crucial. If the score were too triumphant, it would cheapen the suffering. If it were too bleak, it would suffocate hope. Newman threads the needle, soft insistence rather than emotional coercion. Performance direction. The film's power comes from underplaying. Tim Robbins plays Andy like a locked box, controlled, careful, never letting the prison read him easily. That's not emotionless. It's strategic. You sense the inner life because he refuses to display it on command. Morgan Freeman plays Red with warmth and weariness at once. Someone whose humor is a coping mechanism, whose calm is a shield. His performance makes the film feel trustworthy. Even when you don't know what's coming, you believe the storyteller. And the supporting cast matters because they feel like a population, not colorful side characters. Darabont directs them as if everyone has a full life off-screen, which is why Shawshank feels inhabited. Production design, decay is a character. The prison isn't just a location, it's a mood you can touch. Peeling paint, damp stone, cramped spaces, institutional uniforms. These details build the sensation that time doesn't pass cleanly here. it sticks. That physical texture supports the film's central idea. Shawshank is built to make years feel normal. The ultimate craft trick, the movie hides its suspense inside emotion. This is the part most people miss. Shawshank is secretly a suspense film, but the suspense isn't who will win the fight. It's, will hope survive? Will friendship outlast time? Will the system succeed in defining these men? That's why the big payoff lands like destiny. The film has been tightening emotional tension, not action tension.